My name is Eunice T. Dorr, 29 years old. I'm watching the video clips circulate through mutual friend groups right now, the same people laughing in the background while my life split cleanly in half under rooftop string lights. At the time, I didn't know anyone was filming, but of course they were. That's what people do at engagement parties. They capture reactions, they bottle awkwardness, they trade it later like entertainment. What I didn't expect was to become the moment everyone replayed. I had been with Mason for 2 years. We met through work, started out casual, and somewhere along the line it became serious, or at least I thought it did. He was charming in public, confident in rooms full of people, the kind of man who could make anyone laugh as long as the joke wasn't aimed at him. When we were alone, he could be warm, attentive, almost sweet, but he also had a habit of making small comments at my expense, and he always delivered them the same way, smiling, like I was supposed to be grateful he noticed me at all. At first it was harmless, or I convinced myself it was. He'd say my job sounded stable but boring, and then kiss my forehead like that balanced it out. He'd tease my car, call it dependable in a way that sounded like an insult dressed up as praise. He'd comment on my clothes being safe. If I ever looked at him too long, like I was deciding whether I should say something, he'd laugh and say he was just teasing. He'd add, "You know I love you anyway," like love was a consolation prize for being laughed at. Last Saturday, we went to his cousin Emma's engagement party at a rooftop venue downtown. It was elegant, string lights everywhere, champagne flowing. About 60 people celebrating with that polished happiness you see in photos. I wore a navy dress Mason once said made me look sophisticated. He wore a dark suit and acted like he owned the air around him. We arrived together, smiled for pictures, made small talk with relatives I only half knew. Everything felt normal enough that I almost relaxed. Around 9:30, Emma and her fiancé were doing the rounds, thanking people for coming. Emma was glowing, holding up her ring for everyone to admire. When they reached us, she hugged me, then turned to Mason with a grin that said she was riding the best night of her life. She held out her hand to show off the ring again, and then she asked the question everyone asks at engagement parties. "So when are you two next?" A few people nearby turned their heads. The air shifted into that expectant pause where everyone waits for the cute answer, the joke, the promise. I looked at Mason and felt that familiar tightness in my stomach, the one that always showed up right before he made me the punchline. He smirked, glanced at me like I was part of the setup, then looked back at Emma and said it loud enough for at least 20 people to hear. "With her, I can do way better." The laughter hit fast, not Emma. Her face fell immediately, like she'd been slapped. But the people around us, the ones holding drinks and looking for entertainment, they laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all night. I stood there for a few seconds, long enough to see Mason enjoying it, long enough to watch his eyes scan the little circle of reactions like he was feeding off it, long enough to make a decision. I picked up my glass from the high-top table, set it down gently, and looked at him without blinking. "Then don't settle." I turned and walked toward the elevator. No yelling, no dramatic speech, just steady footsteps on marble floors, while the laughter behind me died like someone flipped a switch. By the time the elevator doors closed, my phone was already buzzing in my coat pocket, but the night was far from over. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked calm, almost bored, but my hands were trembling just enough that I had to press my fingers against the seam of my coat to steady them. I could still hear the laughter fading behind me, not because it was loud, but because it was familiar. It sounded like every moment I'd swallowed, every time I'd convinced myself I was being too sensitive, every time I'd smiled to keep the peace. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, the kind that clears your head whether you want it to or not. I walked to my car without rushing, got in, and sat there for a second with both hands on the steering wheel. My phone lit up again. Mason, Mason, Mason. I turned it face down. I didn't need to read anything yet because I already knew what it would say. Confusion first, then anger, then blame. On the drive home, the memories started replaying on their own, like my brain had been waiting for permission to stop protecting him. Mason came from a family that didn't call itself wealthy, but lived like it was always being watched. Appearances mattered. Titles mattered. People's value was measured in what they drove, where they lived, who they knew, what their future looked like on paper. His father owned a mid-sized consulting firm. His mother hosted charity brunches that were really networking events. His older sister married a corporate lawyer and wore her life like a trophy. When we first started dating, Mason made a comment about my car. He called it reliable but forgettable. I laughed because it was early, and I wanted to be easy. A month later, in front of his friends, he joked that I was adorable for being so proud of my regular job. I was a senior project coordinator at a logistics company. Decent salary, benefits, a path I'd earned the long way. But in his world, that wasn't impressive. It was something you explained quickly before moving on. His friends were mostly people he knew from college or through family connections. Lawyers, finance guys, marketing directors. I got along with them fine, but I always felt like I was being evaluated, like my personality was a substitute for credentials I didn't have. Mason introduced me with qualifiers. This is my girlfriend. She works in logistics. That pause before logistics always felt loaded, like the word itself carried a judgment. His family was polite but distant. His father shook my hand at Thanksgiving and asked what kind of car I drove. When I told him, he nodded and changed the subject. His mother asked about my parents. When I said my dad was a retired mechanic and my mom taught elementary school, she smiled tight and said how sweet, like my whole upbringing, was a charming little story from another world. The jokes escalated about 6 months ago. At his sister's birthday dinner, Mason told everyone I still had a gym membership at the community center instead of a private trainer. At a work happy hour, he mentioned I bought my blazer off the rack instead of having it tailored. Small cuts, always delivered with a grin, always brushed off as teasing. If I looked hurt, he'd soften for a moment, squeeze my hand, and say, "I love you anyway," like love was supposed to erase disrespect. I brought it up once. We were driving home from a friend's wedding, the city lights blurring past the windows, and I said quietly, "Do you realize you put me down in front of people a lot?" He looked at me like I'd asked something unreasonable. "I'm joking," he said. "You're so sensitive." I let it go because I didn't want to be the woman who couldn't take a joke. I told myself maybe his humor was just sharper than mine. Maybe this was normal in his world. But every comment stacked up. Every laugh at my expense felt like proof I wasn't enough, that I was being tolerated, not chosen. By the time we walked into Emma's engagement party, I'd become numb to it. I expected some jab about my job or my shoes or how I carried myself. I did not expect him to announce to a room full of his family that he could do better than me. Somewhere between the 10th floor and the lobby, the truth settled in. He didn't just make a joke, he made a statement. He told the people who mattered to him that I was beneath him, and he did it with a smile. I got home and the apartment was empty, quiet in a way that made every thought louder. I sat on the couch and replayed the moment again. His smirk, the laughter, Emma's horrified face. Then my response. Then don't settle. No yelling, no insults, just permission. That was the part he didn't anticipate. I didn't fight him. I didn't beg him to explain. I agreed with him in front of everyone and removed myself from the scene. The power shift was immediate. He wasn't holding the joke anymore. He was standing next to an empty space where his girlfriend used to be, and I knew, even before I turned my phone back over, that he was about to panic, not because he missed me, but because he'd lost control of the narrative. By the time I finally turned my phone face up, I was sitting on the edge of the couch with my shoes still on, the city noise humming faintly through the windows, like nothing monumental had just happened. The screen lit up with notifications stacked on top of each other, so many that it almost looked comical. Missed calls, texts, more missed calls, all from Mason at first, rapid and insistent, like he could will me back into place if he pressed hard enough. The first message came 12 minutes after I left the party. "Where did you go?" Then, "Are you seriously leaving over a joke?" A few minutes later, "Everyone is asking where you went. You're embarrassing me." I read them without reacting, noticing how quickly the focus shifted from confusion to accusation. Not once did he ask if I was okay. Not once did he acknowledge what he'd said. The calls started after that. One, then another, each one buzzing until it cut to silence and immediately starting again. I let them ring. At 10:23, the tone softened. "I didn't mean it like that. You know I was just playing around." At 11:32, "Can you please answer me? This isn't funny." And then right on schedule, the pivot. "Fine, stay mad. I'll talk to you tomorrow when you calm down." I turned the phone off and went to bed. When I woke up Sunday morning, sunlight was spilling across the floor and my phone had 71 notifications waiting for me. Most were from Mason, but a few names made me pause. Emma, and Mason's sister, Claire. That surprised me. Emma's first message came through not long after the party ended. I am so sorry. That was awful. Are you okay? The second followed a little later. She left the party early. People were talking. I think she realized what she did. And then, past midnight, a third message. For what it's worth, you handled that with more class than most people would have. I replied to Emma around 8 in the morning. Thank you. I'm fine. Congratulations again on your engagement. Her response was immediate, a heart emoji and a thank you. Like she needed reassurance that her joy wasn't tainted by what happened. Claire's messages were more direct. That was out of line. She didn't even try to soften it. Then, a few minutes later, she added, She's upset, but honestly, she brought this on herself. I stared at that one for a while. It felt strange seeing someone from his family say what I'd been telling myself quietly for months. Mason's overnight messages told their own story. Everyone is acting like I committed a crime. It was a joke. You made me look like a villain by walking out like that. And then, softer, almost pleading. I get it, you're mad. Can we talk tomorrow? By 3 in the morning, the desperation was obvious. I can't believe you're ignoring me. I made coffee and waited. He showed up at 9:30, still wearing the black suit from the party, his tie loosened, hair pulled back like he'd run his hands through it too many times. His makeup of confidence was gone, replaced by irritation and something close to fear. He walked in without asking, dropped his keys on the counter, and looked at me like I owed him an explanation. Are we going to talk about this, or are you just going to keep ignoring me? I set my mug down carefully. What do you want to talk about? About you walking out on me in front of my entire family. You told your entire family you could do better than me. I agreed with you. What's the problem? His face flushed immediately. It was a joke. It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like you meant it. Oh my God, Eunice, you're being so dramatic. Everyone jokes like that. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked, and felt something settle in me that didn't budge. Do you actually want to be with me, or do you just like having someone around who doesn't push back when you put them down? He blinked. What? You've been making comments about me for months. My job, my car, my clothes, my family. I let it slide because I thought it was your sense of humor. But last night, you didn't just make a joke. You announced to a room full of people that I'm not good enough for you. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. He crossed his arms, defensive now. So what? You're breaking up with me over one comment. I shook my head slowly. I'm breaking up with you because you don't respect me, and I'm tired of pretending that's okay. His expression shifted, the confidence cracking. Wait, you're serious? I'm serious. Over a joke at a party. Over 2 years of jokes that were never really jokes. He stared at me like he was waiting for me to take it back, to laugh, to tell him we'd talk later. When I didn't, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Fine, if that's how you want it. You're going to regret this. I didn't respond. The door slammed and the apartment went quiet again. I finished my coffee, picked up my phone, and felt the first real calm I'd had in months settle over me. The calm didn't last long, but it didn't shatter either. It held, thin and steady, like ice you don't trust but still stand on. By the time the sun climbed higher, my phone was lighting up again, not just with Mason's name, but with others. Messages from people who had been at the party, people who had seen his face when I walked away, people who had replayed the moment and realized something was off. The first call I answered wasn't his. It was Emma. She sounded tired but resolute, the kind of tired that comes from hosting joy while witnessing cruelty. She told me she wanted to give me a heads up. Mason had left her party early, sulking, trying to reframe what happened. He told a few people I'd overreacted, that I was being dramatic, that I couldn't take a joke. She said no one was buying it. She said she had pulled him aside and told him flat out that what he said was unacceptable in her home at her celebration. Hearing that made something loosen in my chest. Not long after, his sister Claire texted again. She said she told Mason he crossed a line. She said he was embarrassed, not remorseful, and that there was a difference. That distinction mattered more than she probably realized. By noon, Mason tried a new approach. The text softened, turned reflective. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was nervous. I was trying to be funny. You know how my family is. I didn't respond. Each message felt less like accountability and more like rehearsal, like he was trying on versions of regret to see which one would get a reaction. At 3 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. I knew it was him before I looked. He always rang twice, quick and impatient, like doors existed to be opened for him. I opened it, but I didn't step aside this time. He stood there holding a paper bag, eyes red, jaw tight. "Can we talk?" he asked, like he hadn't already done enough talking. "You're talking now," I said. He exhaled sharply and held up the bag. "I brought coffee. Your favorite." That almost worked. Almost. But then I realized what bothered me most wasn't the gesture, it was the timing. He was trying to rewind the moment, reset us to before the joke, before the walkout, before the line he crossed became real. "I don't want coffee," I said. He stepped closer anyway. "Eunice, you know I didn't mean it. I was under pressure. My family puts me on the spot. I didn't think." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't think, and when you don't think, you put me down." He frowned. "You're acting like I'm some villain." "No," I said quietly. "I'm acting like I finally heard you clearly." He tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. "So that's it. 2 years and you're done because of one bad moment." I shook my head. 2 years and I'm done because you showed me who you are when you think you're safe." He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Then his tone sharpened. "You're throwing away something good over pride." "This isn't pride," I said. "This is self-respect." That word hit him harder than I expected. He went still, like he didn't know how to argue with it. For a second, I thought maybe this was the moment he'd actually listen. Instead, he straightened up, anger sliding back into place like armor. "You think you're better than me now." "No," I said. "I think I'm better to myself without you." He stared at me, then laughed once, bitter. "Fine, do what you want. You'll see. People don't just walk away like this." I met his eyes. I just did. I closed the door before he could say anything else. I leaned my forehead against it for a moment, not in weakness, but in relief. Whatever he thought he'd come to reclaim wasn't there anymore. That evening, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Emma's fiancé. He said respectfully that my exit had been legendary, and that more than one person had told Mason he owed me an apology he wasn't ready to give. I didn't respond to that either. I didn't need validation anymore. I had clarity. By the end of the day, Mason had stopped calling. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not tense, just clean. And for the first time since the rooftop, I slept without replaying the laugh in my head. The apartment felt unfamiliar the next morning, like it had exhaled after holding too much in for too long. His shoes were still by the door, his jacket draped over the chair, his coffee mug in the sink like proof that a version of my life had ended without bothering to clean up after itself. I moved slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel each decision land. Mason texted just once that day. "I'm coming by tonight to get my things." I replied that I'd be home, nothing more. When he arrived, he brought his sister with him, not for help, but for leverage. Claire gave me a tight smile that said she understood more than she was allowed to say out loud. They moved efficiently, packing clothes, chargers, books, pieces of a life I had already mentally archived. Mason didn't look at me. He didn't try to talk. That silence felt more honest than anything he'd said since the party. When they finished, Claire carried the last box to the door and paused. "For what it's worth," she said quietly. "I told him he screwed this up." I thanked her. She nodded once and left with him. The door closed behind them, and the apartment expanded in a way I hadn't expected. Not empty, just open. The ripple effects kept coming. Emma called to tell me she'd uninvited Mason from her bachelorette events. She said she didn't want that energy anywhere near her celebrations. She said her family agreed. Hearing that made me laugh for the first time in days, not because I felt vindicated, but because it reminded me that cruelty doesn't get a free pass just because it's confident. Messages trickled in from people I barely knew. A college friend of his told me this wasn't the first time he'd done something like that she'd watched him make jokes at someone else's expense and call it charm. Another relative admitted they'd always wondered why I stayed so quiet around him. I didn't respond to most of it. I wasn't collecting apologies, I was letting go. A week later, Emma asked if I'd still come to the wedding. She said the invitation stood, that Mason wouldn't be bringing a +1, and that she wanted me there. I said I'd think about it. When I did go, weeks later, it felt like stepping into a room where people saw me clearly for the first time. No whispers, no jokes, just warmth. Mason tried to reclaim the narrative online, posting vague quotes about walking away and surrounding himself with positivity. They didn't land the way he expected. People commented less. A few pushed back. He deleted those comments quickly. The silence that followed was louder than anything I could have posted in return. 3 months later, I ran into him at a mutual friend's birthday. We didn't speak. He stayed on one side of the room, I stayed on the other. When our eyes met briefly, he looked away first. I left early, not because of him, but because I had plans the next morning. A hike with friends who didn't know his name and didn't need to. Driving home, I thought about that night on the rooftop again, about how 4 words and a quiet exit had changed everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg him to see me differently. I just agreed with what he said and chose myself. That was the part he never expected. Emma's wedding was 6 weeks after the engagement party, long enough for the shock to settle into something quieter and sharper. I almost didn't go, not because I was afraid of seeing Mason, but because I didn't want the day to be about what had ended instead of what was beginning. Emma insisted. She said she wanted me there, that I belonged there, and that what happened at her party didn't define me. It revealed something that needed revealing. The ceremony was outside, late afternoon, the kind of golden light that makes everything look softer than it really is. I sat in the 5th row, surrounded by people I barely knew, and felt strangely at ease. No one whispered, no one stared, no one treated me like a curiosity. I wasn't Mason's girlfriend anymore. I was just Eunice. That alone felt like a gift. During the reception, Emma's fiancé found me at the bar and thanked me for coming. He said he admired how I handled everything, that walking away without spectacle takes more strength than most people realize. Later, Emma pulled me aside during a lull in the music and hugged me tightly. She told me she was glad I came, that she wanted people around her who respected themselves and others. I believed her. Mason wasn't there. His absence wasn't announced, but it was understood. No one asked about him. No one tried to smooth anything over. It was like the space he'd occupied had been quietly retired. When I drove home that night, changed out of my dress, and sat on the couch in my quiet apartment, I realized I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was done. In the weeks that followed, the story kept moving without me needing to participate. Mason tried a few more times to recast himself online, posting photos and captions about growth and strength, but the response was thin. People noticed the pattern now. A college friend of his messaged me to say she was glad I didn't go back, that she'd watched him do the same thing to someone else years ago. I thanked her and moved on. The last I heard about Mason came from his brother, Ben, who texted me one afternoon to say Mason was seeing someone new and thought I should know in case we crossed paths. I replied thanks for the heads up and meant it. There was no sting in that information anymore, just distance. 3 months after the party, my life looked the same on paper. Same apartment, same job, same routines. But the difference lived in the quiet moments. I didn't shrink myself anymore. I didn't laugh at jokes that weren't funny. I didn't stay in rooms where I was the punchline. I chose who had access to me, and I didn't apologize for it. Sometimes I think back to that rooftop, to the smirk on Mason's face and the laughter that followed. At the time, walking away felt like surrender, like I was giving him exactly what he wanted. Now I know better. I didn't walk away from him. I walked toward myself. I set down my glass. I said 4 words. I left. And I never looked back.